Hello, and welcome to the Patch Tuesday webinar. Today, I'm joined by Rob Brown, Senior Director of Professional Services at Absolute. If you have any questions for Rob, please drop those in the chat, and we will be sure to follow up with you after the session today. With that, I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Kristen. And a very warm welcome to everybody that's joining us today. If you're looking at your clock, it actually is a little bit earlier than usual. So everyone that's joining me from the UK and in Europe, this is actually 1 hour earlier. That's just because the US time change will normalize the webinar hopefully by April. We actually had an interesting Patch Tuesday for a couple of different reasons. We had the same number of patches that we had last month, but we've got some really exciting ones. Anyway, let's get straight into it. We are getting closer to the cutoff of Windows 10. So Windows 10 is going end of life in October. You still have plenty of time to migrate from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Once you do migrate to Windows 11, you'll have a number of years before you have to go to the next one. But I would definitely start preparing for it. I am aware some customers are going through a hardware refresh, and that's what they're using as the delivery mechanism to go from Windows 10 to 11. But if you've just purchased new hardware, you might find that it is more feasible to do an in-place upgrade. If you do need any help with a in-place upgrade from Windows 10 to 11, please do get in touch. We can give you some of our automation workflows to help you migrate over from Windows 10 to 11 in place. Windows Server 2012 is in the second year of the ESU extension. So that actually started in February. It runs from February to February. In October next year, that will go end of life with the final update going in October. We will continue to supply the 2012 content until then. Windows 11 Enterprise 22H2 is going end of life as well this year. We do recommend 24H2. It's very stable. It will give you the longest lifespan for the Windows 11 operating system. 23H2 is November 2026, so you do have plenty of time once you get to 23H2 to have the longest length of a feature update. Just to put this into perspective, the way that Microsoft is working the feature updates now is that once you provide the feature update to the device, you will be able to patch on top of that. Once the feature update goes end of life, the operating system is effectively unpatchable. No patches can be applied as the patches are for the feature update specifically. So that is why it's so important that when you go to Windows 11, that you go to the longest length possible on the feature update so that you have the longest length of time to patch it. Everything I've said isn't including any long-term servicing branches. So if you have the Windows 10 or Windows 11 long-term servicing branches, I think you've got till 2030 before you have to before you have to migrate to another operating system. My question is, this month, is anyone testing Windows 12? We do know that when Windows 10 goes end of life, it's likely to be the start point for Windows 12. It's really exciting. Is anyone using it? I'd love your feedback. I want to know what's the patching like on it. How are you finding the operating system usability? We understand there's lots of new AI that's built into Windows 12. I think it's really exciting. Let's have your feedback. If you're finding that Windows 12 is really good operating system and your testing is going really well, I'd love to start a dialogue with you. Adobe. Now, we've been a couple of months since we talked about Adobe, and it's really interesting that Adobe Reader hasn't been updated on Patch Tuesday for at least 2 months. But they did release Adobe Acrobat and Reader yesterday, which I thought I'd just mention. That Acrobat and Reader has been updated for both Windows and Mac OS. They're saying that within these updates, there are both critical and important vulnerabilities that are fixed, which could, if exploited, lead to arbitrary code and a memory leak. But they are not aware of any exploits. They're saying potentially this could lead to exploit, but they're not aware of any. So it's really interesting that they use the priority 3, which for Adobe means deploy within 1 month. So anything more than priority 3 would be the more urgent known weaponization of an Adobe product. So whether it's priority 1, which is immediate, priority 2 within 1 week, priority 3 was in 1 month. The highest CVSS severity vulnerability that is addressed with this patch is 7.8, and there's actually quite a few that are lower than 7.8, but 7.8 is the highest, and that's quite high. CVSS is out of 10, so I would definitely make sure that Adobe DC and Reader on the continuous track is included in any patching strategy that you've designed. Now, we had 53 fixes from Microsoft yesterday. Now, the most common question I get sent to me is comparing the number that we recommend, that we say that Microsoft fixed, and Microsoft themselves. Sometimes Microsoft is actually bundling the Microsoft Edge browser that they may have actually fixed a week before Patch Tuesday. But some of the Microsoft fixes actually are server side on the Azure platform, and they're automatically applied. You don't actually need to do that. I'm purely focusing on the fixes that you have to deploy to your devices, whether you're using the Absolute platform, another platform, or whether you're doing it manually from the device itself. Of the 53 fixes, 6 were critical, 47 were marked as important, or the equivalent of high severity. 10 are more likely to be weaponized, which is higher than last month. 6 are weaponized. Yesterday, when the release from Microsoft was published, only 5 were marked as weaponized. And overnight, they've actually marked 1 more. So it's very important you keep an eye on the weaponization of a vulnerability. It can change from day to day. So it's super important you keep an eye on that. 1 is public aware, but none of the 6 that are weaponized are public aware. That's good. When you have the 2 together, it kind of does make that sort of an almost urgent 0-day approach. And we had no jump points, which is great. Jump points, in my opinion, are some of the most serious vulnerabilities. And if you are following us for the webinar series, jump points are super important to be aware that they exist. Jump points is where the technology can be, if exploited, moved sideways. So effectively, you're breaking in through one part of the operating system. You can break out of that sandbox into another technology and actually continue your exploit laterally. Super important you keep an eye on that. There is no jump points, but that's the first time in, I think, 6 months where we haven't had a vulnerability marked with a jump point. The strategy that you choose is very dynamic based on your organization. Your organization may be distributed across many countries, many continents. You may have fast internet, you may have slow internet. The selection criteria that you are using to secure your organization may include several strategies, of which the bug type that's fixed may be one of those decisions that help you choose the vulnerabilities that matter the most to you. We're going to go on to a recommendation in a moment. And not all patching solutions are equal. Not all patching solutions will give you all the information you need to help you make the best decision for you. That is why we're including a few recommendations on this webinar series to help you make the right decision for your organization. Now, the type of bug that is fixed can make the vulnerabilities more urgent than other bug types. The top 3 I've recommended here are usually the ones that I would highlight first. The remote code execution bug is a class of cyber attack which attackers can remotely execute commands to place malware or other malicious code. So that is by far the most serious. And it also can have further leading consequences in maybe a remote code execution vulnerability and another vulnerability together. If you exploit them both, can actually lead to a full system compromise. There are 22 remote code execution vulnerabilities fixed in this patch Tuesday. Elevation of privilege, that's where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization channel, and successfully grants themselves access to they're not supposed to have. We had 20 of those. That could be, for example, starting a service as the user and then elevating their permissions to a system level account, which gives them unlimited access. And lastly, information disclosure. That's just information leakage. And that actually can be very serious, especially if that data is sensitive. So, for example, if you could cause a memory leak, then potentially any passwords or data that was being passed through memory at that time could be read in clear text. And obviously, then once you know somebody's password, you can use that for an extended attack or another attack later on. We had 4 of those resolved in this patch Tuesday. The 4 at the bottom, it doesn't mean that they're any less serious. They are super serious, but we take the top 3 as a priority. Security feature bypass, allowing you to use tools you're not supposed to have. Spoofing, which is an act of disguise. Denial of service is simply causing the system to fail. And tampering is where you effectively are not stopped from trying to deliver your exploit at the point of the security around that sandbox. So we had a couple of fixes on those. Now, again, if you haven't got the right, if you don't have the strategy ready yet and you're using a number of different data sets, the top 3 I would highlight as the selection criteria if you're using bug type alone. Now, if you are an Absolute customer, we recommend to combine all of the elements together. This is my recommended patch risk profile. This is the patch risk profile that I recommend to all of our customers in professional services. And that's not where we use one element, but we use many elements together to help prioritize one vulnerability over another. Because a lot of our customers are across many countries, many continents, we actually have several deployments running throughout the calendar month, starting with the most serious vulnerabilities going in the first week after Patch Tuesday. The second week would be the second set of patches, etc., etc. Based on banding, we're able to deploy millions of patches each and every month extremely safely across our customer environments. And this is the recommendation that we give to our professional services customers, is to take every vulnerability and to give it a score, starting with the vendor severity. The vendor severity is usually the vendor that is issued the patch from critical, important, high, medium, low, and NA. Sometimes those vendors will release patches with an NA severity, but the CVSS, which is our second recommended strategy, which is a score out of 10 that is given to a vulnerability by an independent organization, can sometimes differ from that of the vendor. So sometimes the vendor will release an update that is NA severity, but the CVSS score will be extremely high. We'd like to use both of those together because both of those gives us intelligence, and intelligence allows us to make the best decision. CVSS is out to 10, and it kind of follows the same banding: critical, high, or important, medium, low, and NA, being NA 0.0. Now, once you've got the vulnerability out the way, now you've got the state of the vulnerability. The state of the vulnerability is in the wild. Is the vulnerability actively exploited? And we're collecting this data both from the vendors themselves, but also from our industry partners. They're letting us know that something is in an active attack. We call that weaponization. A vulnerability doesn't have to be critical in order to be weaponized. And in fact, when a vulnerability does become weaponized, the vendor doesn't usually retrospectively change the severity. So it's very important to keep an eye on the weaponized status. It can change from day to day, as was last night. So when the release initially came out, there was 5 weaponized vulnerabilities, and then a few hours later, there was then 6 confirmed weaponized vulnerabilities. It's very, very important. So use weaponized status as a way of selecting the patches to resolve vulnerabilities, even if the severity isn't critical or high. The next state is called public aware, and that is where someone has detected this vulnerability. This is often found through bug bounty programs. Hats off to the bug bounty programmers that are finding the bugs. They're letting the vendors know, hey, you have a bug. They often give the vendor a time period, say 30 days. Please produce a patch for this, or I'm going to make the vulnerability public. And lately, we've seen a lot of the vulnerabilities go public over YouTube, and they will provide the exact blueprint to exploit that vulnerability. Now, when that goes public aware, we know within 4 hours, and again, our partners let us know, and that means that that vulnerability has the potential to be exploited with this precise blueprint. Public aware vulnerabilities don't always become weaponized. Please be aware, sometimes there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are public aware that are simply impossible. It has to be extremely rare in a very specific set of circumstances to weaponize that particular vulnerability. However, I would rather know that something could be exploited when I'm deciding my strategy. So again, we use public aware as a way of increasing the priority on certain patches over other patches. And next, we got countermeasures. This is our balance. This is what I like to call our balance. Countermeasures are often provided by the vendor. There weren't any yesterday, actually, which again is kind of rare. Countermeasures are mitigations or workarounds where the vendor will give us a set of registry keys or something we can do in group policy, or even if you have this next generation antivirus, you kind of don't have to worry about this vulnerability specifically. But those countermeasures can be often deployed far faster than the rolling out of a 1.5 gigabyte patch. So when you can make a registry change, it sometimes is far quicker to deploy that registry change to effectively mitigate the threat. Do be aware, though, if the vendor is giving you the recommendation for a countermeasure, do read the notes on the recommendation. If they recommend to roll back the countermeasure, please do so. Please don't leave registry keys on your system that are not used. That is actually a future potential attack waiting to happen. And finally, your exposure. Your exposure dictates everything. If you have a high severity vulnerability that's weaponized with no countermeasure on 90% of your environment, that's probably going to be the one you'll prioritize. If there are other vulnerabilities which are high severity, not weaponized, no countermeasure, but on lower exposure of your devices, maybe you'll prioritize those in the second set of patches that you deploy that month. Let's make sure you make the best decisions, especially considering a lot of our customers are needing to test patches before rolling them out. So what we're going to do is pop across to our website. Now, we do publish this on Patch Tuesday. So in the UK, this will be on Tuesday. If you're any of our Australian friends, that'll actually be on Wednesday. So pop across to absolute.com. And on the Absolute website, you've got a resources page. And on the resources page, let me just show you this. On the resources page, you've got the blog post. The blog post is full of other fantastic articles that we write, not just for Patch Tuesday, but for all of our strategies around securing your devices, resilience, your best practices around managing your machines, and of course, automation. If you do have any questions, though, use the chat function in the corner there. Ask anything, including advice on patching strategy, on patch testing, or in fact, if you're not a Syxsense Absolute customer, you can use the request demo button up in the corner. So let's talk about the top 5. Now, I mentioned there was quite a lot of fixes in this release that are higher severity than last month. We had fixes for Windows, components, MMC snapping. Can you believe MMC snapping is still there? Microsoft Office, remote desktop services, Hyper-V, and Visual Studio. The average severity in this release was 7.3. That's slightly lower than what was released last month, but we had more weaponization than last month as well. My top 5 recommendations, I'm just going to highlight them today. The top 5 are the first 5 that have been weaponized, but there are others to consider. At the bottom of this article, there is a link to the PDF. The PDF is the one I'm showing just here. Please go and download this PDF and use this to help decide how much of your environment is exposed. Take the CVE, pop it into any of your patching tool set. Write down on the side here your exposure, and based on your exposure, it will help you to prioritize which of these you're going to roll out to your organization, in which band you're going to do it, and which order you're going to do it. My first and primary recommendation is CVE 2025-24985. This is a Windows fast FAT file system driver remote code execution vulnerability. Now, if you've been with Windows for a long time, you'll know that FAT stands for file allocation table. Obviously, your hard drive is quite large, and it kind of makes sense that if you're storing data on a hard drive, that you put the data next to each other, the ones and zeros next to each other. But on hard drives, that's not the case. Windows will put the data anywhere it can. But it puts all that data together in a file allocation table, like an index. So like this page has got the data on it, that page got the data on it, and it goes back to the index in order to put the data together. Well, there is a potential exploit that could impact this, leading to full system compromise. And it is one of the vulnerabilities that's under active attack. Interestingly enough, the vendor is given this an important severity. Just to put that into perspective, important isn't the most critical severity that can be selected. So based on that, this might be the second deployment, the second selection if you're using severity alone. And in this case, I would highly recommend it be your first. The second one is actually similar to the 6th vulnerability we're going to talk about, which is 2025-24993. This is the NTFS. Similar to that is using the hard drive, but this particular vulnerability is actually exploited via a virtual hard disk, which is attached to a PC. So a virtual hard disk, just like you use on a virtual server, is a virtual hard disk, a VHD file. And if that particular VHD has got a compromised file on it, then when you attach that virtual hard drive to a device, you can actually exploit it. And that again can lead to full system compromise. This particular vulnerability is a remote code execution. So it could launch something that then can be used in a ransomware attack. Its CVSS is 7.8. It does require you to be on the device or local across the network. It doesn't require any privileges at all. Complexity is extremely low. So in that scenario, it's a rather easier vulnerability to exploit, but it does require that user interaction, which is why the severity is probably marked as important. My third recommendation is 2025-24983. This is a Win32 kernel subsystem elevation of privilege vulnerability. Again, it's under active attack. Now, the Win32 kernel subsystem is effectively the brains of the operating system. It's extremely important that we keep both the operating system up to date. In Linux, this also has its own kernel, and you can choose not to update the kernel there as well. But this one in particular, I would highly recommend. The potential exploit of this is that you can escalate privileges from a standard user on the system to an admin on the device, therefore being able to do anything. It's extremely important. There is no workaround for this actually that's provided by the vendor, so I would highly recommend this also be included. My fourth recommendation is CVE 2025 26633. This is the MMC snap-in feature bypass vulnerability. The particular MMC snap-in allows attackers to evade security policies leading to unauthorized system modification. So a lot of IT admins save their MMC snap-ins on a share, and you can then go and run those MMC snap-ins to effectively saving all of your kind of users and security group policy groups and things like that. In vulnerability management, outside of patch management, I would highly recommend that you not allow any unauthorized or untrusted MMC snap-ins to even be launched. So there are actually local policies that you can apply on your system to stop MMC snap-ins from being open from untrusted sources. So first, let's get this patched. Secondly, as part of a wider strategy around security vulnerability management, let's make sure that your IT admins aren't allowed to open untrusted MMC files specifically. And lastly, there is another NTFS vulnerability. This is an information disclosure, slightly less severe as the other ones. This is a CVSS score of 5.5. It doesn't require any privileges required, low complexity. It does also require access to the local device. Now, this one is suggested that it has been weaponized, but in the low hundreds. So in that sort of context, low hundreds of exploits across the world actually is quite a low potential for you. But I would still recommend that this be included in your environment. And in fact, a lot of these are impacting almost every single operating system, from Windows 10 still, Windows 11, and up through the operating systems. As I said, all of the vulnerabilities are marked, sort of recorded here on the PDF. Read the additional information. It's extremely important. We do put a lot of information here to help you make the right decisions of why you should be prioritizing this, and also what the impact is if you actually get exploited. Some of this will actually be really good to go through once per month on a patch steering meeting with your IT departments. I really appreciate you joining us today. This is the sort of shorter form of the Patch Tuesday. I really hope that this has been useful for you. If you do have any questions, we love the comments. We love to help build the strategy that's right for you. And until next time, I wish you happy patching. I'll see you in April. Thank you.